And welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Tom Fernelli, that's Bud Elliott, and that right there, if you're watching on youtube.com/cover3, if you were watching on the CBS Sports app, which you can get through all your connected TVs, that is Dennis Dodd, senior college football columnist for CBSSports.com, familiar voice and friend of this podcast. Dennis, we've got a lot that we want to get into here. We want to talk playoff. We want to look at some of the ways that the industry and college sports in general has responded to the NCAA throwing this sucker on cruise control and just sort of saying everybody can go figure it out when it comes to name, image, and likeness. But I begin with, how are you doing? And especially in the context of our discussion right now, coming with media days right around the corner, a college football season that we feel much more confident about here on July 7th than we did 1 year ago. But where are you in your off season and preseason preparations here as we look ahead to the 2021 season?
I'm good. I've gotten out a little bit, went to a quarterback camp over Memorial Day in Santa Monica, and saw a lot of the top quarterbacks. Just to see humans again was great. Then to actually talk to them was even better. So over the past 15 months, I think people have don't know me anymore. They used to take my calls and I said, who is that guy? I don't remember his face, but it's been good. Coming out of COVID and looking forward to media days, SEC, that's going to be, a show pony as it always is. Some of the other ones, Pac-12 with a new commissioner is going to be interesting. And I'll be really interested to see, I don't know about you, Bud, has anyone seen an interview or anything with the Heisman Trophy favorite, Spencer Rattler? Because I haven't. And I'll drop a little news on you. He's not going to be at the Big 12 media days. The guy you want to come see is not going to be there. So let the controversy start, I guess. I don't know.
I want to see Caleb Williams anyway.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah,
Tom is definitely team Caleb Williams.
Yeah, we've got a little bit of a theory that we're cooking up right now that the best quarterback, we are trying to start a quarterback controversy in Norman, Oklahoma. So Lincoln Riley, I'm sure, is going to love what we're going to do as we continue to push this narrative that Caleb Williams should be QB1 for the Sooners.
What if Lincoln brings Caleb over Spencer Rattler? Huh? Just think about it.
Fellas. It's one of those, he wants to reward an upperclassman, blah, 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 that whole thing, Well,
you remember
that would be a story. Yes.
You remember when John Simpson, the offensive lineman for Clemson, showed up at ACC media days with a blonde wig because everybody was mad that Dabo didn't bring Trevor. But if we just trot out John Simpson in a blonde wig, I'm sure that'll do just as well. Are you going to be at SEC?
I am going to be at SEC. And I'm looking forward to it. They sent out the parameters and protocols, and it's going to be, I don't know if they're going to honor all the credentials, but there's going to be limits to where people can sit and be. That doesn't really affect me or us, but it'll be interesting. I don't think they're going to have the fans in the lobby of the Winfrey, just due to protocols, I think. And that's half the fun of seeing there. The ring man, the guy with the national championship ring on his head, you guys have seen it all.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if they'll do Radio Row. If they do, they'll space it out. But yeah, I mean, lots. I think Dan Mullen is first. That's going to be really interesting.
Is it 4 days still?
Yeah. It ends, goes Monday noonish, and then it ends 12 or 1 on Thursday. And to put that in perspective, here's all you need to know about big time football. The Pac-12 with 12 teams does 1 day. The SEC with 14 does 4. That's all you need to know.
Got to give everybody their time.
Days. Yep.
Hey, yeah. I mean, you got that content that you got to be able to put out there. So one of the things that you've been really working on is trying to get behind the scenes and figure out what seems to me are like the biggest questions and what kind of timeline we're looking at in terms of the college football playoff, because we are in a position where everyone knows it's going to expand. We have some decent parameters in terms of timeline, in that Bill Hancock has told us it could be as early as 2023. The contract itself expires, I guess, 3 seasons later. The 2025 season would be the last one of that. So as you've had to, you've been speaking to members of the management community. You've been speaking to Power 5 athletic directors. You've been really trying to tap into what the discussions are like. I guess the beginning question is, what kind of timeline do you sense we're going to end up seeing from the college football playoff expansion?
I think it'll be more than 2 years, but really the question is, what does ESPN want to do? They have to decide first whether they're going to renegotiate this massive $7.2 billion deal inside, the 12-year deal that it's in now. We're in year 8 now. We're going to year 8. Or do they want to roll the dice and risk it and let it go out to term in 2025 and they lose their exclusive negotiating window? I don't think that will happen either. They're not going to let this get away. The projections now are almost, it's not a Super Bowl like money, but it's one administrator called it platinum property, in that this is the biggest thing out there right now. Now with the NFL wrapped up, it looks like pretty well. And to the point that all the other conference revenue deals will take a back seat. The Big 12 recently, it was reported in the Lubbock paper, approached ESPN trying to renegotiate early for whatever reason. They wanted to do their contract. The Big 12 ends in 2025, and ESPN said no. And I think I know why. They're saving all their money for the CFP and whatever they have to do with that. So ESPN has to decide what they're going to do, what that looks like. That could get tremendously complicated, in that they may not be able to afford it and could bring on a partner. Do the commissioners themselves or the presidents want to parcel out this, these 11 games like the NFL does to different networks, wild cards on one network, conference final or conference championships on another? I think there's a lot of money to be made there if they think that. Or they just say, hey, let's stay with one loyal partner and go. But whatever's going to happen, it's going to cost ESPN at least another $500 million per year. So on the low side, the thing is going to double. That's what the experts say. But I'm hearing it could, depending on how big it gets, could be 4 or 5 times it is now. And you can understand the pressures with that, with the players not getting enough money and the CFP. Somebody, one of the sources had a really good point. Whose call would you take right now? Would you rather take Bill Hancock's or Mark Emmert's? Mark Emmert is in charge of a basketball tournament and an otherwise failing organization. The CFP is a separate entity, an LLC that controls major college football, basically. So I think you'd rather take Bill Hancock's right now.
Yeah, plus there's like the chance that Mark Emmert's phone is tapped, so you never know who's really listening at this point with all the Supreme Court stuff going on. But can ESPN even afford to let it get to the point where it hits the open market? And I don't just mean from a financial impact of having like everybody else being able to join the bidding. It's just, if you look at what ESPN is spending on college football rights already, not including the CFP, with the ACC network recently pretty much taking ownership of the SEC. I don't think that it's in a position where it can afford as a company to lose the CFP, because that's really, there's a reason, like you said, that the money for this is going to double. They're expanding it. This is the cash cow of college football. And for as far as ESPN's brand and being the network of college football, I feel like they're kind of backed into a corner where I think the CFP can kind of dictate the terms to them in a large way.
Yeah, you've read that the right way. No, they can't afford to let it go to term. That's why it would be in their best interest to really drop a number on the CFP where they can't think about letting it wait 5 years. That being said, Disney's had a bad year. Parks were closed, COVID. I don't have to tell you that.
Yeah.
ESPN had its own problems, but you just go rummaging between the couch cushions and find some money, at least 500 million more a year. Maybe I don't know how the structure works at Disney. Does the Disney side give ESPN money to do this deal? I mean, do they take a loan from the Parks Department? I don't know. I don't know the economics on it, but you're absolutely right. They can't afford to let this go if they're going to call themselves the worldwide leader. You can't have all these conference deals and then have Fox do the playoff, for example.
It feels like they should be willing to overpay for the certainty of having it. To Tom's point, right? Like what if a non-entity right now that does college football jumps in, like a Google or an Amazon? Yeah,
that's something I addressed in doing my research. Is 5 years from now, who knows what that's going to look like? They may be in with both feet. They aren't particularly right now, but right now, any network with a streaming component, and pretty much that's every major network, ABC, NBC, CBS, has a shot at this because they have the streaming component where you can put shoulder programming. Eventually, do you put games on there and start charging a premium like ESPN Plus does? So that's all in play. And until and if I say until, I think it'll happen eventually with sports rights. Until that happens, they're going to try to keep it on the traditional linear cable as long as they can. ESPN Plus is a long-term play where they can charge for content. They're doing it now. It's essentially the Big 12's network. They got some NHL, I think, in baseball on there, but I think they're long-term. They're going to start charging for games, and they do now. Part of the Americans deal is on ESPN Plus. But if they ever get involved, who knows? They haven't to this point. Apple has said repeatedly they're not interested in that content. And you got to understand the big streaming companies, the standalones, are multi-billion-dollar companies, and these football deals in comparison are relatively minor deals. Maybe the money goes up, they get more interested, but I don't think so right now. But in 5 years, absolutely, that's a threat.
Is there a pressure from the athletic directors, from university presidents to get the money faucet flowing quicker? Like, are they going to be the ones that if ESPN does come and says, throws out a number, is there going to be a pressure from the schools to say, hey, let's get this increased revenue in as fast as possible to address some of the financial shortcomings that they've had over the last 2 years?
That's a great point. In times of strife, college athletics always opens the faucet like this. In 92, the SEC broke the seal with the championship game. In 98, the BCS. In 2014, the playoff, and now this. And then you throw in COVID and the fact that the Alston case has had yet undetermined impact, but it will have an impact in that these education benefits tethered to education, they're capped at $5,900 per year per athlete, and it only impacts football and men's and women's basketball for now. But if you do the math on the average athletic department, that's an extra $1 million hit. And I talked to somebody about that. Is that a lot? Absolutely, it's a lot. It's to the point where you got to start thinking about, cutting sports if you just have an extra million that you just had to, account for. So, and that it could be a lot more than that at some schools. So, yeah, that's going to be a problem. COVID, you've read story after story of, schools laying off and having to take loans and being down 20, 30, 40, $50 million. So that kind of answers the first question. I think the ADs want this to happen sooner rather than later so they can get that money.
So do you think this is happening right now, if not for COVID? Or do you think that, this is like a direct result of COVID? The fact that this suddenly seems to be pushed down the track.
Yeah, no, I think it would have happened anyway. And it may have happened sooner if COVID didn't come. Ross Dellinger of Sports Illustrated did a great behind-the-scenes story about how it came about. I vaguely remember this working group being formed and then just forgot about it. Who was it? It was Sankey, Swarbrick, Bowlesby, and Craig Thompson from the Mountain West. And in his story, he said as early as March 2020, in the middle of COVID, they decided on 12. No other details, but they decided on 12 and kept it a secret until, more than a year later when they announced it was going to be 12. So, yeah, I think it would have happened anyway. Again, the pressure points are now what I mentioned financially and how quickly they can get this thing rolling.
Blue Angels are flying over the vacation house.
For the listeners who don't know, Bud's at the vacation house, and the Blue Angels are doing practice over his vacation.
Hey, that's the sound of freedom, boys. That's the sound of freedom right there. Where were you surprised when you were having some of these discussions? Because there's some other aspects that I want to get to this as well, but just in terms of what maybe caught you off guard or what made you want to do a little bit more researching. I know that when you do these stories, they come together over long periods of time. One conversation leads to another, which, gives you the question you need to ask somebody else. where, as you were starting to put together, again, an all-encompassing playoff story that you're working on for CBSSports.com, where were you a little bit surprised, or what sort of changed some of the things that you were looking into?
I think the Rose Bowl, and I know a lot of people that doesn't matter, but nothing happens until the Rose Bowl's decided, just because it's the Rose Bowl. And the conclusion from everyone I talk to is the Rose Bowl's just going to become a random quarterfinal. It's not going to get its traditional partners unless it lines up that way. It may not get January 1st at 5 p.m. Eastern. And as more than one person put it, we're through with the tail wagging the dog. They feel like the Rose has got preferential treatment really ever since the BCS started. And so the Rose has a decision to make. Are they going to be all in and be part of the playoff, which I suspect they will be, or are they going to hold on to this, this Pac-12 Big Ten thing? Now, complicating that is our old friend Jim Delaney, the retired Big Ten commissioner who retains a lot of power and influence, is consulting with the Rose, the Big Ten, and Pac-12 and how to strategize this. So I suspect they're going to go kicking and screaming into this. So, not so much the Sugar has the SEC and Big 12, the Orange has the ACC, and then Notre Dame, SEC, and who's the other one in there, Chip?
Big Ten,
I think. Yeah.
Big Ten on the other side. That's not so hard. I talked to one of the Bowl executive directors, and he said, well, if this thing comes to pass, we can unspool this pretty quickly. It'd be kind of complicated because a lot of money floating around, but I think everyone would be made whole because of so much money floating in the system. And, somebody said this a long time ago about the Rose Bowl, that the Rose Parade and the Tournament of Roses is more important than the game. And I think that remains the point today. Now, do they want to play the football game? Absolutely. But there's going to be a halt there where, Cincinnati is playing Iowa State in the Rose Bowl at some point. I'll just pick two teams out of the air. It's going to be different.
Do you think, speaking of that, potential there, let's assume the Rose Bowl just does what it's going to end up doing and just becomes part of it, and the Big Ten Pac-12 thing is probably going to be dead, or maybe they'll have an agreement where if there's a Big Ten team on a bye, we get them in that game. But is there going to be a pecking order that you could foresee with the bowls involved in this, kind of like we've seen with the New Year's Six, where, the Sugar Bowl, the Orange Bowl, the Rose Bowl, they're not the bowls that have been getting the G5 team. Is there going to be a pecking order in this new playoff where it's going to be like the Sugar Bowl's yeah, no, we're going to be a quarterfinal, but you're not going to send the G5 team to us?
No, what I learned from this whole exercise, I guess, is that for the first time, these games are more important than where or when they're played. In other words, the Sugar Bowl, and somebody made mention of the San Gabriels and the sun setting, or forget that. You're going to take what you get. For the first time, all these postseason games are progressive pass-throughs. They mean something. In the current setup, you've got New Year's Six Bowls, which are nice games, maybe great games, but they're still exhibition games. And that's why the playoff is more valuable. Every game means something. Where have we heard that before? It just means more. So no, none of that's going. If they get, I don't know, pick somebody from the West Coast. If they get USC and Clemson, or that's a bad example, USC in Texas, then that's who they're going to have to take, because the games themselves are going to be worth that much. The ratings, the stakeholders are estimating, are going to be better because of that. They can't get any worse. Last year's championship game ratings were the worst year over year in the history of the CFP, down almost 28%. Live sports was down for whatever reason during COVID, but that's a big reason they did this. It's ESPN has to make its money back after it pays all those rights fees. And if the ratings are down from the advertisers, that's not good.
You know if the bowls are going to pool the money the same way the conferences do? No matter the ratings for your specific game, everybody's going to get an equal share?
Yeah, I don't know that. That's a good point. And that's something that has to be determined. After the fact, after the CFP was announced, the Sugar Bowl went out and made its own deal. The ACC did too. I think the numbers for the Pac or the Big 12 and SEC were $40 million each they got from the Sugar Bowl to contribute to that. I don't know how that's going to work in this setting, since it's, a one entity thing. Again, every game means something.
Dennis, obviously they have to play nice with the Bulls right now due to the length of the bowl contracts, how long they run. But obviously Tom, there's a lot of things that Tom doesn't like about the new playoff system. I'm pretty in on it, but one thing we do agree on is that playing these games at the Bowls is not great. It'd be much better if you got the bye and then you got home field advantage in your next game, right? Do you see them just playing nice with these Bowls because how long the contracts run, and then in the long term them being phased out, or do you really think they're going to make these kids go play neutral site games and make these families keep traveling to these things?
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think it's in stone. The proposal is conference sites in the first round, and then Bowls through the quarters and semis, and then cities will bid on the championship game. And so in that sense, then the 6 existing Bowls, if they re-up, and you got to think they will have a playoff game every year. But I don't know how the presidents are going to react to that. This is what the commissioners want. That's what they put out. Now they're doing a feasibility study. Yeah, I think there's something to be said for campus sites in the first 2 rounds, like you said. I guess what we're talking about, and then in the semifinals, then you would just have the situation where it is now: 6 Bowls cycling through semifinals once every 3 years. It is now they get a semifinal. And I don't have a problem with that, but I have had indications that these people feel tremendously loyal to the Bowls. And if they are going to take away some of these traditional matchups, then the reward is you're going to get a game that means something. People are going to travel for it. It is a neutral site. Yes, I know those top 4 seeds, as it stands right now, aren't going to get a home game, but I think that's something that can be discussed. I think that's definitely on the table. Depending on what the Rose wants to do or the Sugar wants to do. So I don't think that's written in stone. I think that's still up for debate.
From my perspective, that's one of the reasons why Notre Dame just absolutely killed it, because they can never have they will never have to go to one of these neutral site games to start, right? Like they could be the number 1 team in the country. Oh, they didn't win a conference. Oh no. So you're saying we have to get another tremendously profitable home game, right? Like that's why they really killed it in this deal. I'm just curious as to how long that will last. I think you're onto something there.
I disagree about Notre Dame, and I respect and understand the other side, because a lot of people think Notre Dame was a winner. I had them as a loser in this when this thing was trotted out. I'll tell you why. Their access is better with, they only have to finish in the top 12 to get in. If they're seeds 5 through 8, they host a game on campus. But they can, Notre Dame, which has happened basically 2 of the last 3 years, they can finish undefeated and in the top 4, and the best they can do is a 5 seed, and play that extra game. Now they're rationalizing it, saying, well, that would have been our bowl game or our conference championship game anyway, and I don't want to ever hear about the fact that we don't play a conference championship. But think about Notre Dame. Notre Dame is one of those handful of schools that plays for championships. Their last championship was in '87. Now, because of this setup, they have to win 4 games to win another championship. And I know it's the same for other schools as well. But Notre Dame is different. I just wonder how tired fans are going to get. And they're a little bit tired now after being blown out in 2 playoffs in the last 3 years, where Notre Dame just makes the playoff and makes an early exit. They're going to want a championship. It just became a lot harder for Notre Dame.
But what are they going to do, Dennis? Are they going to stop buying tickets to that 1 home playoff game 2 out every 4 years if they actually get it? What is more the pressure on Brian Kelly administration to make changes? Because I don't think the fans are going to stop supporting a team that goes to the playoff.
Yeah, no, they won't stop being supported, and people won't stop watching them. I mean, that's why Notre Dame had to be a part of this, why they're so attractive. You either love them or you hate them. They're like Texas or another team that you have an opinion, like the Yankees. You always have an opinion about Notre Dame. I just think that, you're right about Brian Kelly. I think he's underrated. Any criticism about him right now, he's taken him to 3 postseason berths, 1 BCS, 2 playoffs, given the strictures at Notre Dame, given the climate, everything else. I think he's done a wonderful job. In a couple of years, he's going to be the longest tenured coach and surpass Newt Rockne. But Notre Dame's a different beast. If they get in this thing and start getting, a second round exit, I don't think that's going to sit well with Notre Dame fans.
So it is almost, go ahead.
No, it's because that's part of like this whole thing, like Bud mentioned earlier, that I've got a lot of problems with this. Part of my problem with this too is like they're completely uprooting a whole lot of the sport here really quickly, like going from 4 teams to 12. Like we're not gonna screw around with 6, we're not gonna screw around with 8, we're going straight to 12. We're gonna kill off a couple bowls. But then while they're doing that, they're also still clinging to things like, well, we need to have the bowls involved. We need to make sure that, we've got them as home games in the second round. We've got to make sure that conference championships still matter. So it's like, I feel like they're doing kind of a half measure of a whole measure. You know what I mean? So that's part of my problem with this. Like, I feel like if you're going to take this step and go to 12 teams, put every single game on campus before the semifinals, and then just rotate the 3 of the 6 bowls that you have now for the playoffs. Rotate them through as semifinals, just like you have been with a neutral site championship game. It doesn't make sense to me that they're not doing it. It doesn't make sense to me that you have to win your conference to earn a bye.
Yeah, and that might happen. As I said, I think that's still a discussion point where you play for something. You play a team that finishes 1 through 4 gets a home game. I don't get it either. And they're being kind of crass about this. They want to take care of the bowls. But if any of these bowls don't want to pony up and it's going to cost a pretty penny to be in, hey, hello Liberty Bowl, hello Gator Bowl. Greg McGarity at the Gator Bowl now, the executive director, they're making a pitch. They've hosted Super Bowls there, a lot of them. So yeah, it's a little bit sentimental, but it's also very profit driven.
Dennis, does it surprise you that the bowls still have this much influence? Like we know just from Dan Wetzel's research from Death to BCS that, like, okay, they were greasing these ADs back in the day and giving them golf and giving them vacations and whatnot. But like now these ADs make so much money. Like, does it surprise you that those kind of gifts are still getting that much kind of influence, or is it just a long-term friendship that were created out of that and relationships, or are they giving these guys a lot more under the table than maybe we know or suspect? Like, how do they still have the influence that they have when the sport is bringing so much money independent of them now?
Yeah, that's a good point. Because they're the players right now. There's only 6 of them, that want to pony up. I think most of the graft and underhanded stuff is gone since the scandal at the Fiesta Bowl. Now, I was at the Fiesta Summit in May in Phoenix, where that has about 70% of FBS, their coaches and ADs with spring meetings. There was only a handful this year, but I wanted to go just to see people, and the gift suites weren't there. I think a lot of these people paid their own way, and the Fiesta Bowl set up some conferences. There was one on diversity. There were some other ones, that kind of made the thing worth going to if you wanted to. But if you wanted to go, you basically had to pay your own way. So I think most of that's gone. There are destinations. There's tradition. Does anybody want to go to the Independence Bowl in the playoff? No. And so there's only a handful of these, these bowls that are really going to be in it. But I think the days of them buying their way in is over. Here's what you're going to get if you join this new playoff. You're going to get teams you may not want. You may get a group of 5 teams, but it's going to make sense because to us, meaning the commissioners and the presidents, these games are very worthwhile now, at least on television.
Well, can the bowls now? The Bulls can grease the wheels just by endorsing players and then funneling that money through the players to the ADs. Yeah. Boom, problem solved.
By the way, after seeing what happened in Miami, I think now more than ever, I think you're going to see somebody like Coke partner with, I don't know, the 4 quarterbacks in the playoff.
Like they do with NASCAR, where they have like the Coca-Cola drivers, and they're going to have,
they have commercials that run in a loop throughout December and January. I think that's coming. I mean, Spencer, I don't know if anybody's noticed this, but Spencer Rattler, DJ Uiagalelei, and Sam Howell have basically signed contracts with the agents who are going to represent them in the NFL. Mm-hmm. So, and it's allowed, we know that. But Spencer Rattler's agent did Patrick Mahomes' deal. It says on his bio he's very involved in endorsements with State Farm and Avis and Verizon. I fully expect to see Spencer Rattler in the State Farm commercial with Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes by the end of the year or during the season. That would be allowed, but this is what it has wrought.
Yeah. When you said Coke, I thought we were talking about like Kansas football and Coke Industries. Different kinds of
Jayhawks are about to
endorsements.
become a juggernaut.
Hey, it's one of the most powerful lobbies in the country want to get involved in NIL. That's another story, yeah.
We've got more on NIL coming up in a little bit. I did want to make sure we hit this aspect of playoff expansion with Dennis Dodd. Again, digging in on all this right now, and you can always find all of his great work at cbssports.com. So we have definitely pointed out that the expansion of the playoff is going to have real impacts on the bowl system, on the relationships with the bowls, and there will be fallout there. What is the sense from athletic directors, conference commissioners on what an expanded playoff does for the regular season? And is that something that's positive? Is that something where they're seeing opportunity? And if they're seeing opportunity, do you believe them? Like, do you think that the regular season now carries more value when it's time to renegotiate your deal with your media rights partners? With Big 12's up in 2024, and I think some of the other ones might not be till like 28, 31, 32, 36. Does playoff expansion come with bigger checks from conferences to schools from media rights deals?
I do. I think the value of the regular season just went up, and I really think the value of those conference championship games went up because they're a de facto play-ins now. Even if both teams are going, maybe one's going for a bye. Maybe they're both going for a bye, and they have to win that game. It enhances the value of those games, and certainly the group of 5 conference championship games where they're going for one spot. It's going to be really interesting at that level. Yeah, I think the Big 12 gets about $3 million per school for its conference championship game. That's about to go up, and I think a lot of conferences are going to follow the Big 12's example and do away with divisions. The Pac-12 has talked about it, where you're matching your 2 best teams, where you quote unquote can't lose. In other words, both teams are going to go, or you've enhanced the prospect of your best team going. Instead of, I always use the answer, I think it was 2018 or 19, where Ohio State played an 8-4 Northwestern. Well, that would have been a bid stealer for somebody. I think it would have knocked out Ohio State. I'm not sure, but you wouldn't have wanted Northwestern to win that game, and they didn't. I think they lost 45-28. But in any given year with divisions, that could happen. With one division, it's likely not going to happen. Now, as far as the regular season, yes, I bought into what Bob Bowlesby was saying early on, that it will enhance the regular season because more teams will be in contention. Gordon Gee told the president at West Virginia, who's part of the board of managers, told me, he said by November 1st, there may be 40 teams we're talking about. That might be too many, but there might be 30. And Tom, you do that story every year, and I've done it in the past, where you have trouble coming up with 6 or 8 teams that can win it. Now that gets a lot bigger. You can talk about teams being able to afford to lose in September. Yes, that's true. But just the Cinderella factor alone with the group of 5 is going to extend, I think, throughout the season.
So Dennis, I have a question here. It's something I've been thinking about a lot. And we might have touched on this on a prior show, but traditionally, the college football playoff, the rankings have pretty much matched the polls closely, right? And we know the polls, they really operate more in a system where they take and they rank the teams in tiers based on the number of losses for the most part. Like, you don't typically see a 3-loss team over a 1-loss team, basically ever. If that continues, it's sort of a disincentive for teams to schedule and play these big games if the goal is to make the playoff. Now, there's obviously other considerations like, making money for your big time home and home games or these big neutral site games. Do you think that the committee is going to start to use, more metrics that account for schedule strength and things like that, like performance controlled for by schedule quality?
I'll answer it another way, because I remember 2 years ago, I did this story where Georgia, Florida, and Texas had gone out of their way to schedule Power 5 opponents in the future. Now, yeah, they can afford to do it, but the unspoken, or even the spoken point at that time, was that when you schedule that way, and with an expanded playoff coming, and they didn't know whether it was going to be 6, 8, 10, or 12, you will be able to get in at 10-2 And now with 12, I think certain teams will be able to get in at 9-3. So the risk reward, it's trending more to the reward than the risk. Has there been, I think there's been 1-2 loss team in the CFP. Was it Auburn a few years ago? I mean, Alabama a few years ago.
They were just a one loss. They were a one-loss non-division champ. We haven't broken the seal on a 2-loss team in the 4-team playoff yet, but we've been close.
Yeah, and only one is one, and that was LSU in 07 with 2 losses, and that was when worlds collided. So I think now regularly you're going to see 10-2 and maybe even 9-3 teams, depending on who they beat, in that 12 in those at-large spots. So no, I think it will for certain schools. Look, Vanderbilt needs to schedule so they can get to a bowl game, but I think these other schools are looking into the future, saying it doesn't do us anything to schedule Charleston Southern because we're not going to impress the committee. We risk not selling out, and it does nothing for our team. So no, that's the way I look at it. Now, how the committee's going to look at it, they've said from the beginning, since Jeff Long in year one, schedule matters. So
they haven't backed that up so far.
You're right in certain situations. You're right. Now, Cincinnati, if they're the best Group of 5 team this year, they would win at Indiana and at Notre Dame. They've got the chance to make an impression. So we'll see.
I think it's very important.
Really interesting.
No, I think it's very important that we get 9-3 teams that have already proven they're not national title teams into the playoff to prove once again that they're not national.
Well, yeah, teams. I mean that's when you expand this thing.
Yeah, that's my problem with the expansion. In a nutshell, is teams that have already proven they can't win in the national title this year will now be able to lose in the national title playoff again.
And that how much bonus money will that incur? Everybody's got Kansas coach has playoff bonus written into his contract. So if he's got Lance Leopold's got it, everybody's got it.
I do think that, Tom, that the other situation would be worse, right? If we reward a bunch of teams for going 11-1, when like all the power metrics say the 9-3 team is better, that's worse because that actually creates a disincentive to schedule the big time regular season games in the future. Like one of the benefits of the playoff, if they do it right, quote unquote, and actually reward the teams for scheduling these things, is that you'll get more of these big time games scheduled during the regular season, which makes the regular season a little bit better.
For sure. But if you look at those 9-3 teams, typically who are the 9-3 teams? Who are those 3 losses against? They're against the 11-1 and 10-2 teams.
Oh, I'm not arguing that they can win the thing.
Yeah. So but we've already had this argument 1,000 times.
Because it's an argument of best versus most deserving, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the most deserving side of the argument says, I know that the schedule metrics say that Cincinnati should be behind 2-loss Oklahoma and 2-loss Iowa State, but Cincinnati has a 0 in the loss column and they both got 2 losses. Why is Cincinnati getting hurt like that? Because they feel like they're most deserving, even if advanced analytics schedule metrics might say they are not the best compared to that Oklahoma or Iowa State team.
And what this will do is, those Group of 5 teams will now have a harder time finding games. I think Louisiana plays Texas this year. Well, when was that scheduled? And going forward, that game will never be scheduled if you're Texas. If you're going to lose to somebody who's 11-1.
Coming up on the other side, the name, image, and likeness era is underway. What has Dennis Dodd been hearing and seeing about the impact that it's had on all of college athletics? That and more next.
There were 2 big ones yesterday, the Miami one, and what was the other one that were announced yesterday? Big NIL deals. Oh.
The trilogy is upon us. UFC 264. Conor McGregor will be facing Dustin Poirier on July 10th. The series is tied 1-1 with each fighter owning a knockout win, but there's only one place where you can get all your UFC 264 coverage, and that's Morning Combat with Luke Thomas and Brian Campbell. The boys will be live in Las Vegas all week to interview fighters and preview this massive fight. Make sure you check out Morning Combat for all your UFC 264 coverage by visiting youtube.com/Morning Combat or on any podcast platform. So we're starting to see not only some individual deals, which started right at midnight, but now we're almost seeing what seemed to be like group licensing deals almost. How have you been surprised at all, Dennis, about the way that things have been developing on the name, image, and likeness side over the first week of its existence?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty calm. Nothing really stood out except the Miami deal on, what was it, Tuesday, where they announced a partnership with an MMA firm or something, where every player gets every player on the team gets $6,000 a year to basically endorse this company, $500 a month. That to me is an inducement. That's what the NCAA said you couldn't do. That could be defined as an extra benefit, and taken to another step, that could be group licensing. MMA has, hey, we've got these 90 players, we can deliver them to somebody else because we're paying them. I don't know if that's a bad thing or not. Group licensing eventually, I think, is going to get us back to the EA Sports football. But that one raised my eyebrows a little bit. But there's been nothing out there, where somebody got a Cadillac or a Lamborghini or something like that and tried to fight the system. They've been mostly tasteful, to the point that De'Ara King and there was another, Spencer Rattler, are donating part of their earnings to charity.
Yeah.
So the deal
Casey Thompson is too at Texas.
Casey Thompson, yeah.
The deal that you're speaking of, American Top Team, is a gym chain all throughout Florida, MMA training, MMA gym. It's the home training facility for more than 24 professional fighters, including Amanda Nunes. And the deal is $500 a month for these endorsements. So it can be that big number that you said, but my understanding of it is that we weren't signing deals that were promising or guaranteeing, that this was much more of a pay-as-you-go type basis. But still, when the gym's owner, Dan Lambert, decides that he is going to make this an offer for every single Miami football player, all 90 of them, then yeah, you could $500 a month for 90 players for an entire year. Like, goodness gracious, that's going to be a whole lot of money. I think that that side of it is something that probably generates more headlines than we actually see the follow through, because the players have to actually opt in. And I don't know if all 90 players are going to be opting in to this opportunity.
No, and it speaks to I hear the critics saying of NIL saying, well, it's going to be a competitive disadvantage and really upset, the balance of power. In what way? I mean, where are we at right now? If this is true, Miami's about to take off and win national championships. Well, they haven't, and they won't, I guess, in the near future, because they're not as good at football than Alabama or Clemson or Ohio State, for whatever reason. We've written reams about that. So yeah, you're right. It's not going to change. Does it separate the group of five a little bit? Yeah, I guess. But Western Kentucky is not going to suddenly start landing recruits over Alabama because of what they can offer in NIL.
I think it. Oh, sorry, Dennis.
Go ahead.
No, I think it will upset balance of power a little bit, but the balance of power will not between schools. It'll be between coaches and players, right? Because like now, some of that endorsement money that may gets funneled to the coach, is going to go to the players. I was looking up something for a piece I'm writing on 24/7, and so when Spurrier became the first $1 million coach in '96, right? That was big news. If you adjust that $1 million in '96 for inflation, it's 1.72 right now. Now, the top coaches in college football make $9 million. So college coaching salaries have outpaced inflation over the last quarter century by almost 6x. Like, that's crazy. Whereas player salaries have been mostly flat, right? At least the ones that we, are legal. I'm interested, like, let's say somebody does challenge the system. Do you really think the NCAA is going to want to rule them ineligible and have this go to court? Like, isn't this a very similar situation to the one that Kavanaugh talked about, where you basically begging, bring me a case?
Yeah, I that's a good point. I talked to somebody, a former NCAA employee last night, who just kind of wondered what does legislative services and amateurism services do these days? What is amateurism? The NCAA is not going to decide to rule somebody ineligible in answer to your question, I think, anytime soon, unless it's some sort of under the table inducement like Tennessee or Arizona State. That's a different animal. But with this stuff, they got to keep hands off. I mean, that's what Kavanaugh said. Like, don't come before us with one of these cases again, because you'll be slapped down because you violated antitrust and you are a cartel, whether you believe Kavanaugh or not. That's the vibe out there. And that's why the NCAA waited until after the Alston decision to just basically back away and become a fly on the wall. What ended up happening, it was a proposal or an idea that basically sprang from Greg Sankey at the SEC, who in his history has been a strict and staunch amateurism guy. He just is. But he saw what was coming and said, why don't we just let the players make their own deals with the schools? That kind of eliminates the NCAA as a middleman and at least mitigates legal liability. We haven't seen anybody sue anybody yet. So if a kid, in other words, if a kid doesn't like a deal at one school, he can transfer, one-time transfer, and go to another. If he's a recruit in basketball, he's got 350 options. There's not much room there to sue a school. So that's how that came about. And if I were one of those people that worked on the NCAA NIL working group or solutions group, I'd be pissed because they worked on that for months and years. And at the end, the day before, you guys know this, they just threw it all out the window and just capitulated.
So the front-facing side of this from schools, football programs, athletic departments is we are excited. We're here to help you. Our school is where you can make the most money off your name, image, and likeness. We've got these relationships. We're excited to put you in touch with these people. Look at all of our athletes and all of the opportunities they have in the community. Is that the same message that behind the scenes you think athletic directors, I assume university presidents might not be in line with that, but coaches, athletic directors, is that the same behind the scenes? Like, are they excited about what this could mean for the future?
I think they've just accepted it. I think coaches and ADs long ago just accepted it. In the beginning, it was, oh God, the sky's falling. We heard that for years and months. Well, it didn't. A week into it, it looks like this is going to be the way things go. And school try to get out in front of it by partnering with platforms that can help the kids along. I think that's a good idea. They don't necessarily need it, I don't think. Alabama went and created their own NIL platform. Yeah. And I suppose it's probably better than anybody else's, knowing Alabama, because they've got a lot to offer. So I think this isn't an original thought, but one commissioner told me in a couple of years, we'll be talking about this like we are cost of attendance. And do we ever talk about cost of attendance? No. We get brainwashed by these coaches who lose their minds over Auburn players making $100 more a month than Alabama in cost of attendance. And guess what? It doesn't matter. Now, will it matter in this? I don't think big picture. I just think the best teams will keep winning. I think the guardrails are already in place. You can only take 25 in football and 15 in basketball. And Nick Saban isn't going to sign the 10 best quarterbacks out of the 25 because it doesn't make much sense for his roster. So this is just, I think it's a way for what the NCAA wants is the student athlete to be as much like the normal student as possible. This makes them more normal.
Yeah, I think, like, going back to your question, Chip, I think right now a lot of that excitement, like particularly on the coaches level, is that this is something else. They're looking at it like, all right, this is something we can use. This is something we can use to improve our roster. Like, this is a whole brand new thing. Like, it's a new recruiting pitch. And when you try to think of accumulating talent to bring to your program, this is a new avenue to do it. It's just, I don't know if in a few years from now, I think it'll be interesting to see the enthusiasm for it when some reality still set in where it's like, okay, well, we're a mid-tier Power 5 program. And even though we now have this, we still can't compete with, the elite, the blue bloods, the top tier schools. So it's probably really exciting now. And I think kind of like what you said, Dennis, a few years from now, it's probably just going to be another part of the job.
I'm also interested to see, so the Miami deal, the MMA gym chain, they got a ton of pub yesterday. Like they were actually talked about on the national news, like the not the sports news. They were written up by ESPN, by all the major outlets. Guys, they easily got $1 million worth of advertising just in mentions alone. Like, do you know how much it costs to get a positive segment on a national broadcast? About your company and mentioning your name. Like they game the system there. If they renew this deal for next year, they're not going to get that. So I really wonder, like, will that type of deal last? If so, are the companies actually getting real value for that, or is this really kind of a way to funnel money from boosters to players? Not that I'm against that, because I actually am in favor of them getting what they can get, but like, it just makes me wonder how many of these companies are jumping on these deals to get the positive PR out of it, because we're not going to be writing stories about, hey, Miami's getting this, and it's not going to make the national news a year from now, like Dennis said, with cost of attendance.
Yeah, I think it'll just, we just won't pay attention as time goes on. You know, I've had all these offers and people call me, hey, we're going to do this and that. And I go, that's great. You know, it looks great now, but we're just going to become numb to it and become used to it. You know, and players will be on commercials, and that will be the way things are. You know, I think there's something to be discussed about, and this is why the NCAA wants an exemption from Congress. You know, you saw it from Reggie Bush this week. He wants his Heisman back. I guess because of NIL, but I think even today, what he did in 2010 and what USC got penalized for would still be a violation. I might be wrong there, but I think you're going to see a group of players who are quote unquote harmed by enforcement rulings in the past that would have been allowed today. I'm thinking of Tattoo-gate, that would have been allowed. Sue the NCAA, like some sort of class action. I put that to a lawyer yesterday, and he said they might, but the statute of limitations might run out. You know, it would have to happen in like the last 4 years or something, where a group of athletes were harmed by an NCAA decision, because what they did would be okay today.
We just think for a second, like you brought up Tattoo-gate. Can we just go back in time and think about what a huge deal that was?
Oh yeah,
and the ramifications it had, and now here just a few years later,
yeah,
it's been perfectly legal.
Yeah. People jump all over me on Twitter for that, even to this day, because I was covering it. I agree. It all would have been allowed today. What got me is, you know, the senator Jim Tressel lying to the NCAA. That got him fired.
Yeah,
no, he never worked again. So in that sense, yeah, he deserves everything he gets. Now the players, what they did, yeah, as the years have gone on, it's meant less and less and looked more minor and more minor. But it is laughable now that, you know, you would sell a jersey or trade something for a tattoo and you get sanctioned.
Yeah, like the Todd Gurley, AJ Green stuff. It's incredible to think of like what the big deals were just a few short years ago. And now it's like, hey, yeah, hell yeah, go do it. Maximize your brands.
So Dennis, one thing that you've got coming down the pike in next week, I believe, is going to be your annual hot seat analysis. Oh, the fans get so mad to see their coaches on the hot seat. So we're not going to run down the entire list. We're going to save those conversations for closer to when the story comes out. But as a little tease for our listeners, I want to ask this. Let's say of Power 5 coaches, or maybe Group of 5, if this fits the bill, where do you think are some of the most intriguing storylines around the hot seat, whether it's the team that they have coming up, the performances that they're coming off of in 2020, who among those, 9, 10, 11, 12 coaches that are going to be near the top of the list, who among those coaches really stands out as being a story that you, as senior college football columnist, and really interested to see how it plays out?
The Nebraska situation is fascinating to me right now. Even before Bill Moose had retired, and by the way, that was in no way, shape, or form a retirement. I just wondered what Nebraska was. What's its brand? Does the average 18-year-old think of it? With Scott Frost a few years ago being the hip young coach who had the chops, who had the ability, who had the background, and it's just completely fallen on its face. 12-20 in his 3 years, I think, and going into year 4, what does that look like? When I suggested he was on the hot seat last year, well, he just signed an extension. What do you know? And even now I have people telling me he just needs time. Well, if you just need that much time in college football these days, that's the school's problem. It's not the coach's problem, because you're probably waiting too long. So he has to go to a bowl game at least this year to turn things around. And they don't look like they have the personnel to have it. Now, the guy that hired him, Bill Moose, was escorted out with a nice $3 million severance package. You don't give somebody, if they quit, which is what they're saying he did, he retired, you don't give him $3 million 5 days later. But so now the new AD, whoever he is, did not hire Scott Frost. And what does that look like? And what kind of pressure's on? I think the first pressure point we'll see on that, I would look very closely to see if the streak ends at Nebraska this year. They did not sell out for the spring game. Because of COVID, it was only half capacity, but they didn't fill it. And that would be a huge indicator if they do not have a sellout this year, the way things are going at Nebraska.
Dennis, I think it's a really interesting one. I think Nebraska is more likely than not to make a game, but they're a school that I think will benefit greatly on the recruiting trail from NIL.
Yeah.
Right. Like they have people who want to support the program. I don't know that they always are pedal to the metal with how they do it, currently, as far as the bag game stuff. And there's not very many other things to endorse in the state of Nebraska. Right. So whereas if you're in Miami, like there's a lot of Miami players getting endorsements, but the influencer market in Miami it's pretty crowded, right? There's a lot of folks who go to Miami are influencers. In Nebraska, you kind of could really corner that market. I'm interested to see if that job is more attractive now because of the influencer potential.
You saw the biggest news out of Nebraska last week was the Runza deal, where it said the first 100 athletes in Nebraska, in the state, not just University of Nebraska, get $100 or whatever it was. Does anybody know what a Runza is?
Oh yes, it's delicious, is what it is, Dennis.
It is a guilty pleasure, but if you had to describe it, people would stick their finger down their throat. It's ground beef, cabbage, onions, and what else? Something else, and spices on a roll.
Spices, yeah.
And if you had to describe that to somebody, you go, ugh. But it's a delicacy in Nebraska.
Does it taste like Philly cheesesteak, kind of? Is it that mixture of flavors and combinations?
Kind of, yeah. It's kind of like a calzone, but it's a sandwich.
Like a shepherd's pie calzone without the mashed potatoes?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll take that.
It's delicious. That's what it is.
He is Dennis Dodd. You can follow him on Twitter at Dennis Dodd CBS. Keep up with all of his college football coverage at cbssports.com. Catch him on CBS Sports HQ as well. You can follow him on Twitter at Tom Fernell. You can follow him at Bud Elliott 3. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.